G'day, I'm Paul. So I'm constantly bringing you reviews of utes and SUVs, but today I thought we'd do something a little bit different. This is the Nissan GT-R, and from the end of 2021, it's no longer allowed to be sold in Australia because it doesn't meet side impact safety rules. Fun police getting involved in everything that we do. This here is the T-Spec, which kind of bridges the gap between the standard GT-R and the ball-tearing Nismo version. It's priced at just over $250,000, but if that's too expensive, the whole range kicks off at a little under 200 grand. But I don't know that you will pay that second hand. I flicked through a used car listing for GT-R. These are selling for around $1 million. Well, they're listed for $1 million. I have seen them change hands for about 600 grand. So there is a huge amount of demand for these at the moment. This competes with things like the Porsche 911, the Audi R8, and the BMW M8 competition. There's a few other sort of random competitors in there, but they're the sort of main ones that it's competing against. Today we're going to do a detailed review of this car. If you do want to skip ahead to other parts of the review, you can use the time codes up on the screen there, or if you're on YouTube, scroll down and use the chapters below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. That's going to tell you every single time we drive cars affected by the fun police. Let's talk exterior design. So you've got 4 external colors to pick from. They're all $1,500. This is kind of a personal favorite of mine. It has a lot of heritage within Nissan. It's called Millennium Jade, and it absolutely pops here on the GT-R. I think it just looks absolutely schmick. Now, this car's been out for ages, and despite the fact it's been out for ages, I think it still looks nice and aggressive. I had the chance to drive the Nismo version of this at the launch in Germany, and I think that takes it up to another level with all these bits cut out of it and stuff like that. But I'll run you through the T-Spec changes in just a second, but it does sort of bridge that gap between the regular one and the Nismo. So down the front here, you have a big open grille as I get rid of these flies where the cooling comes through. You've got a twin turbo V6 petrol engine in there, and it needs a lot of cooling, especially given this car will do over 300 k's an hour. So it is some pretty serious equipment. Now up the front here, instead of a Nissan badge, you've got a GT-R badge, and just next to it T-Spec. So that'll signify that this is different to a standard GT-R. And then down from that body color, you've got this sort of brushed aluminium style design, bit of piano black, and then another gaping air hole down the bottom here. So pretty awesome looking setup, and this car is very aggressive, especially when it's coming towards you. You can definitely tell it's a GT-R. The design is synonymous with GT-R. Over here on the headlights, you have a set of LED headlights, indicator built into that top section there. And if you have a look at the bonnet here, you have functional cooling vents along the top there too, and then headlight washers as well. Now around the side here, we have a set of 20-inch forged alloy wheels. So T-Spec gets this gold design. I reckon that looks seriously cool. Really just suits this Millennium Jade color as well. This particular spec also gets the Dunlop SP Sport Max tires. So this is effectively a semi-slick, so you want to be driving in very dry conditions when you're going out for a fang. Behind here you've got a set of giant Brembo carbon ceramic brakes. These are from the Nismo, so they measure 410 millimeters at the front, 390 at the rear, 6-piston caliper. Again, at the Nismo launch that I was able to attend in Germany, I had a chance to hold this, and it is incredibly light. When you think of a rotor that size, you think it's going to be really heavy, but it's light to hold, and you can see that when you reduce unsprung mass on each corner of the car, that's going to increase the pace you can do and also improve the handling as well. So really cool setup, and I'll be keen to see how they perform when we go out for a bit of a drive. Now up the top here, you've got another GT-R badge, and then there's also a vent built into this little section just here to direct air out of it. You don't have an indicator built into that wing mirror. I thought I'd show you this. So this is kind of the OG of this type of door handle, right? They use this on Tesla cars now as well. Basically push in here and then pull that door handle to open the car. So really nice setup, and then you've got a button there to lock and unlock the car with a proximity key. Come around the back. Now T-Spec also gets this carbon wing, and I love that it's exposed carbon as well. So everyone that you're driving past can tell that it is a carbon wing. And of course, look at the rear. This is kind of just synonymous GT-R design with those tail lights wedged into there. Another GT-R badge, T-Spec there as well. Now I wanted to tell you a quick story about the exhaust, as these flies infest my face. It is a titanium exhaust, and they have used titanium exhaust before on these, but when I was at the Nismo launch in Germany, I had an interesting chat with Tamura-san, who effectively said people didn't know it was a titanium exhaust until it heated up and went that blue color. So what they did is, for the tips, they actually made them permanently that color so that you could actually tell it was a titanium exhaust and you didn't have to wait for the car to get warm. So it is funny how the functionality of a titanium exhaust being lighter is overridden by style when it comes to everyone needing to know that your exhaust is actually titanium. Tell me what you think about the design. Is it too old now? Do you think it still looks good despite its age? Let me know what you reckon about the Nissan GT-R down there. So we are inside the GT-R. Let's start off with the key. So it looks pretty familiar. You've got GT-R up the top there, lock, unlock, and boot. And then on the back of the key, it's blank. It's a proximity sensing key. So you just push that little button on the door. Once you're inside, you have a start-stop button down here. So let's talk about the styling. So yes, this does feel quite dated because this car is old, but if I'm honest, I actually think it still looks pretty cool. They've really, I guess, classed up the interior. They haven't gone to town on digital screens and all the sort of stuff that you'll find in a lot of cars today. Like you think Audi R8, for example, you've got that big backlit display. It's all very high-tech and fancy, whereas this just sticks to what it does best, which is being a performance car. It gives you analog gauges ahead of the driver. This stuff here, which we'll go through when we go for a drive, but it is just straight to the point. Then what they've done here, especially with the T-Spec, you can see there's Alcantara along the dashboard, the A-pillar, along the roof there as well with that stitching. Really nice setup. And then the T-Spec as well gets these green leather inserts along the doors, this center console, and I just think it looks cool. So yeah, that's my opinion on this. It is old, but good old. Now in terms of the touch points, so soft there and soft there, which is kind of typical Nissan. How soft is it? Well, we've got our gyrometer. We've tested the main surfaces in this cabin. If you want to see how this car compares to others, have a look at the link in the description. Build quality. So this is all really, really sturdy. I've found in the past with some of these cars, especially the older ones that I've driven, they've actually held together really well despite their age. So that is good. Doors. See what that sounds like. Sounds nice and solid, and it's cool that the door handle is just this little thing here that you pull up. So yeah, not a bad setup in the GT-R. Now let's talk infotainment. So this is a pretty basic infotainment system. It's an 8-inch display. You have shortcut buttons either side. You also have this little toggle down here to switch between menus on the move, just to make life a little bit easier. But inherent to all of this, you have inbuilt satellite navigation. So it's just a pretty sort of basic and straightforward setup. You don't have any smartphone mirroring, so no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto is available. And then in terms of audio, you have an AM and FM radio, and that's all plumbed through an 11-speaker Bose branded sound system. Pretty good sound system, so if you do like your beats, you can turn it up if you're sick of listening to the exhaust. Probably the most exciting thing about this is the function menu. This is where you'll see all of your driving information, such as your engine temperatures, the torque split for the all-wheel drive system, and then you can flick through the menus to get G-bubbles, boost. It really is just, how do I say this? It really is just like an old school implementation of the gauges that you used to see strapped to cars growing up. So I love that it has all this stuff. It is ultimately pretty pointless if you're just driving around just in a stock car, but I think it's good that it has it. It just adds a bit of, just adds a bit of customness to this GT-R. Now let's chat safety. This is going to be a very short discussion. This has like barely any safety technology attached to it. You've got your standard airbags, so your front, side, and curtain airbags, but you have no AEB, no lane departure warning, no blind spot monitoring, none of that stuff. So it is pretty basic in that sense. And I guess it's just a symptom of having to spend lots of money to integrate that technology in it kind of not being necessary in a car like this. Brands like Porsche and Audi have moved to integrating these systems into their cars because, you know, they're constantly evolving. So let's hope the next generation of this comes with all of that safety tech. But in terms of parking, you have front and rear parking sensors and a reverse view camera. I'll show you what the camera looks like. Yeah, it's really not very good. It is super low resolution, but you do get those guidelines to give you an idea of what's behind you and which direction the car's heading in. So let's talk about practicality, and we'll start with your connectivity. So you have one 12-volt outlet hidden just here next to the steering wheel. In the center console here, you have another 12-volt outlet, and then two USB ports and an auxiliary port. Then in terms of storing your phone, it can live here in the cup holders without too many dramas. And what about your coffee cup? Well, here it is. You've got two tiers of cup holder here. So you can pop it in that one, which means coffee is easy to extract. Then you have a slightly deeper one as well. Of course, with our bottle, that means the deeper one easily fits into there without any dramas. There are no teeth though, so that might move around a little bit. There also isn't really a great deal of storage inside the doors. You can fit a small bottle like that, but it's not really sort of built to hold too much. In terms of other storage, you have a center console here that you can easily pop a few little bits and pieces in, and then you have a glove box as well. Although there isn't a great deal of room there, but I do love the fact that you get this leather-clad GT-R book for your manual. And there's also a switch over there that disables the boot lid as well. So if you do need to leave the car with a valet, you can basically switch that off, lock this with the key, and then you can't get into the boot. Now, in terms of comfort, you have dual zone automatic climate control. The seats, so the seats are electrically adjustable for the driver and front passenger. You can go forwards, backwards. You can also move the backrest forwards, backwards. You can lift the seat as well, go up and down with the front portion of it. You also have heated seats, so there's a little switch down there to activate that. Seats themselves have got that green finish on them, Alcantara in the center there, and then they're perforated on the outer edges. These hug you in really nicely. You've got these little sleeves in here for, you know, full-point harness as well if you ever want to go down that path inside your car. It has all of that functionality. The steering wheel offers both tilt and reach adjustment, but it's kind of unique. You've got two little switches here, one for your tilt, and you'll notice the cluster moves with it as well, and then you have another switch there for your reach, which is pretty cool. And then in terms of our reach test, all of this stuff is easy to reach while you're driving. Now, this is normally the bit where I would get in the back and show you how much leg and headroom there is and stuff, but that's probably not going to happen. So this is a bit like the 911 in the sense that you've got two seats there to make this a four-seater technically, but you're probably not going to use them. They're kind of emergency use only, but it is a good space to store little bits and pieces if you do need to. There isn't a great deal of leg room here if you do have this seat quite far back, but you do get a couple of creature comforts. So you've got a cup holder just there in the center. You've got hooks on the sides there to hold like a jacket or something like that. ISOFIX points on the two seats, plus a big subwoofer for the sound system. So let's talk about cargo space. I don't expect it to be big, but let's see what it looks like anyway. Look, that's actually not terrible. It has a really high boot lip, but 315-ish litres of cargo space. Now, I don't have our suitcase, but we've got this camera bag. It's sort of more than enough to fit something that size in there, which I think is pretty reasonable. In fact, I reckon you could even fit a set of golf clubs in there. I'm not a golfer, but yeah, I think this is the type of car that you want to be able to take to the golf club and, you know, whip your clubs out, go for a hit, or whatever golfers do. I like this as well. There's like a leather pull here to bring the boot down as well. So instead of having to grab this, you can just pull that down and away it goes. So yeah, not a bad setup there. Now, normally what I would do is we'd be driving as we got to this section, but I wanted you to hear this. Have a listen to this. Everything sounds so mechanical with this car, and the reason for that is that the engine is up the front here, but the transmission is down the back. It has a rear transaxle and basically sits back there. There's a shaft that runs down to the transaxle and then another one that runs out of the transaxle over to the front axle, because this is permanent all-wheel drive, and that's all done via a clutch. So I'll explain how that works in a second, but you hear a lot of mechanical stuff here, and as I shift this into drive, you can just hear everything happening there as the car is ready to take off. So it is really cool, and that's probably one of the things I love about this. It's not quiet, it's not sort of technical in that sense. It is very mechanical and it feels incredibly raw. So let's hit the road and we'll start talking about the engine. All right, so we are now moving. Let's talk about the engine. So you've got a 3.8 litre twin turbocharged V6 petrol engine. It makes 419 kilowatts of power and 632 Newton meters of torque. It is just such a good amount there, especially in a vehicle like this. Look, it does weigh a little bit, so it's about 1,700 kilos, but it's more than enough to get it up and moving, and you will definitely feel it once you're on the move. And it's all mated to a 6-speed dual clutch transmission. Back when this was launched, this was one of the first cars, or the first sports cars on the market that actually had a dual clutch transmission. They were kind of the OG of the dual clutch. And in that sense, it feels a little bit old school. So it's not quite as svelte as something like a 911, but when you do sort of start rifling through the gears, it can actually increase the pace of gear shifts using these switches down here that I'll run you through in a second. How does it all feel behind the wheel just in your standard driving mode? Well, It's actually pretty civil, so when you are in and around the city, it's sort of doing everything that it needs to do. With the ride, it is pretty firm when it's in its standard mode, but you can slot it down into comfort. And when it's in comfort, it's actually surprisingly good. It has adaptive damping, and that means that when it is in that comfort mode, everything is much softer. It does have more body roll if you do get stuck into it, but it does mean that potholes, speed humps, and all the kind of stuff that you'll spot in and around the city are dealt with much easier than they would be if this was just a straight sort of fixed suspension setup. So I briefly touched on the engine and the transmission. At the back there, you have a 1.5 way limited slip differential. That means that when you do have throttle load, it's acting as a limited slip differential. But then when you're off throttle load, it's half acting as a limited slip differential. So a 1-way LSD is only on throttle load, and then a 2-way LSD is on and off throttle load that it's acting as an LSD. And that means that when you are sort of doing turns and you're not on the throttle, it's still giving you some of that limited slip, but it's not fully locked like it can be on a drift car, for example, that generally uses a 2-way LSD. But up the front there, it's an open differential. So when it does pulse torque to the front axle, and it can do up to 50% of torque to the front axle, 100% of torque to the rear axle, it means that you are getting an open diff. And then if it does need to restrict wheel slip, it does that using the brakes and a sort of torque vectoring system. Now let's talk fuel economy. Nissan claims an average fuel economy of 11.7 litres per 100 Ks. The reason I'm not going to show you the fuel economy here is this particular car was trucked to the proving ground, so its entire life with us has been driving around the proving ground. So it's done no highway driving, no sort of city driving in that sense, in a real city. So we won't bother looking at that, but you know, this is a performance car. You would expect it to sit around the 12 or 13 litre per 100 mark if you are driving it as a daily. So what's it like in terms of noise? We'll dial up the speed just a little bit here to country driving speeds. Look, there is a fair bit of tyre noise coming into the cabin. With those semi-slicks, it is, you know, transmitting pretty much everything into here, especially on coarse chip roads. So if you are using this as a daily, it is worth just keeping in mind that it's not going to be the quietest place to be seated in the world, but ultimately if you have the stereo turned up, it's not that bad. You do also have a switch down here to limit exhaust noise. So give that one little flick and all of a sudden out of the back it goes nice and quiet. So you can either go loud or quiet depending on what mood you're in. Let's quickly talk about these switches down here as well. So you have suspension mode, comfort, normal, and R. You also have drivetrain mode in R or normal. And finally, you have stability control in standard, R or off. To access the R modes, you just push and hold the switches until R lights up. And speaking of which, we're going to go for a little stab here. So I'm going to pop this into R for drivetrain, R for stability control, and then we'll pop it into R for suspension. I'll put this into manual mode, which is across here. I'm using paddle shifters for everything now. Dial back a couple of gears here for our corner. Oh, loving that noise, a little bit of overrun there. Oh man, this is absolutely epic. I genuinely lost for words. This is insane. Man, okay, so a bit of a backstory. When I went to the Nismo launch in Germany, we went straight onto an autobahn and we're sitting on 300 Ks an hour, straight out of basically the hotel to the track, and then we drove the cars on the track. This car has been engineered over the years to become this incredibly capable track missile. And while something like a 911 is a point and shoot, a lightweight machine, this just feels next level in terms of the punch you get in the back as you lay on the throttle. You've got that induction noise coming out of the engine, and it has so much traction mid-corner. Just roll onto the throttle here. Far out, it is an absolute missile. Even in the R mode here for the suspension, it's not overly firm. It's not like it's back jarring or sort of doing your head in as it's driving. It really is just nice and sensible and relaxing. Steering feels good. It could be a little heavier, I think. It is sort of fairly light, but it does feel just exciting behind the wheel. And that all-wheel drive system, I think that if you were to lose traction in this, you would have to be doing some serious speed. Even the gearbox, it is so nice and fast that when you go to pick up the throttle, oh, it is seriously cool stuff. Despite the age of this car, it still puts a massive smile on my face. Let's talk about these brakes. So obviously, if you're capable of doing like 300 k's an hour, you want to have decent stoppers. Before they're warm, they're not great, but as you pilot into a corner and you're sort of attacking that pedal on the way in, sorry, I can't help myself. Yeah, when you're attacking the pedal on the way in, it has a lot of pedal feel, and as you sort of start getting gradually harder onto that pedal, it pulls up the car incredibly well. And with those semi-slicks, because you have so much rubber on the road, you have enough grip there to pull this thing up in a real hurry. With the carbon ceramic brakes, they don't necessarily stop quicker than a car with steel brakes, but they give you repetitive stops. So if you are attacking a racetrack, you can basically hammer these brakes as hard as you want, and generally they won't fade, or it'll take them much longer to fade. And they also last longer than a standard set of brakes as well. So that is one positive to that. They are more expensive to replace when they do go, but for the most part, you're actually getting a much better driving experience because you're able to just constantly hit that pedal and know that it's going to feel the exact same every single time. All right, let me put this all back into quiet mode, and let's talk about what this is like just sort of driving normally. Visibility wise, clear visibility down the front there. It is a big car, but it doesn't feel all that big behind the wheel. It sort of is very sort of easy to drive in that sense. Visibility out the rear is great. The spoiler does sort of eat into that vision line a little bit, but it's not too bad. Visibility out the side is good as well, but keep in mind you don't have any of those blind spot monitors or anything like that. You actually perhaps sit a little bit higher than I would have liked. I would have liked to be able to sit a little lower in the seat, but for the most part, it's fine. I personally think that for me, as an average driver, this feels very exciting to drive. It's not quite as point and shoot as something like a 911, but it still is incredibly exciting to drive despite the age of the chassis. With a professional behind the wheel, and I've done hot laps in these as a passenger, man, it has so much grip. It has so much traction and mechanical grip as well, that it really just sits on another level in terms of Japanese sports cars. Now let's quickly talk about this thing here in front of me. So I love when we're driving, just being able to have a look at some of these menus, seeing our braking forces, our acceleration forces, seeing where the torque is being distributed, whether it's all going to the back or to the front. It really is just an awesome little menu to have. And you don't have time to look at it while you're driving, but it is good to have a little bit of a peek down here when things settle down a little bit. So I do love that it has that. So let's talk 0 to 100. Nissan claims a time of 2.7 seconds, and it's actually a fun process to enable launch control on this car. So I'll just come to a stop here. What you do is everything goes into R mode, but I found that it gets a faster launch in the sense that it tucks down when the suspension is in comfort. So that's drivetrain and stability control in R, suspension in comfort. All you do is hold the brake and the throttle. The revs go up to about 4,000 RPM, and then I just sidestep the brake and we shoot forward. So let's give this a shot and see how we go. There's the revs, let go of the brake. Oh man, that is like sick inducing. You know, normally with an EV, when you do that, you sort of get all the rush and all that sort of fun stuff. But in this, you hear the noise and it kind of, I don't know, it just gets faster. With an EV, you get all of that sudden acceleration and then it tapers off. With this, it's kind of, it hooks up, and then once it hooks up, it slingshots you forward like just an absolute rocket ship. So that will never get old. Now, I'll quickly touch on this as well, exhaust sound. So as you sort of go back through the gears, you do hear a fair bit of noise coming out of it, but a lot of it is just induction noise and then a little bit of squealing there from the brakes. You don't really have all the barks and the pops that you get in some other cars with dual clutch transmissions. And look, I think that's fine. I've seen stacks of these cars that have aftermarket exhausts. You stick one of those on this and your whole neighborhood will know that you're driving a GT-R. So yeah, that is worth keeping in mind. If you do want all of that raw sound and emotion, this is more just about delivering power and torque to the ground as opposed to making a big racket about it. So the Nissan GT-R, look, I grew up with GT-Rs. Well, I didn't actually own any GT-Rs, but some of my mates did, and they were quite an iconic car in my teenage years. And this, to this day and age, to me, is such an appealing car. Like, it may be old, it might be dated and all that sort of stuff, but it puts a huge smile on my face, and it just feels like a driver's car. A lot of the new cars, like the M8 Competition, are just so fast, but not quite as engaging as something like this that just sticks to a sort of pretty easy and traditional formula. So yeah, look, this puts a big smile on my face. The flies definitely don't, but I think that if you are wanting to buy a piece of history, now is the time to be getting your name down for one of these, because later on, who knows, this will be hybrid or electric or something like that. Today is the day that this is a twin turbo V6 and it puts a big smile on Paul's face. So let me know in the comments section below, have you bought a T-Spec? Have you got an R35 or even the Nismo on order? That thing is like next level altogether. Let me know in the comments section below. What do you think about the rules about side impact and this being killed off in Australia? Let me know what you think down there. Now, if you did enjoy this video, please make sure you share it with your mates. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. That way you'll find out every time I get attacked by flies. But until next time, take it easy.